Today, we're jumping into the history of Canada. And really, it's a tale of two worlds colliding. First, you have the world of the First Nations, who lived on this land for generations. And then, the world of European explorers, who showed up with maps, big ambitions, and a completely different way of looking at, well, everything. Let's get into it.
It's a great question, right? Because before we can even talk about the collision of these two worlds, we've got to understand how the original peoples of Canada kept their culture, their stories, and their entire history alive for thousands of years.
The systems they came up with were just incredibly sophisticated. I mean, history, beliefs, all the crucial life lessons, they were passed down through really powerful oral storytelling. But it wasn't just spoken. You had wampum belts, where key events were actually recorded in these intricate symbolic bead designs. And then there were detailed drawings on bark that could capture entire histories. This wasn't history in a dusty book. This was living history, woven right into the fabric of daily life.
So let's try to picture this world. This was a land without any fixed borders, long before Europeans arrived to start drawing lines all over the map. This was the world of the First Nation.
You see, life was completely in sync with the rhythms of the earth. Their movement wasn't random at all. It was incredibly purposeful. They would literally follow the seasonal migration of animals for hunting and the growth cycles of plants for gathering. It was a life lived in this constant, graceful motion, with nature as its guide.
And this just speaks to their absolute mastery of the environment. The First Nations were brilliant innovators, using everything the land gave them. Wood, stone, and bone became their tools and their shelter. Animal skins turned into warm clothing, which was absolutely essential for surviving those harsh climates. Nothing ever went to waste.
And their way of governing was just as unique. Forget about simple majority rule. Communities were guided by councils of elders who would advise a chief. But here's the crucial part. Major decisions were only made when everyone reached a collective agreement. The whole system was built not on winning a vote, but on achieving unity and making sure everyone was on the same page. Now, this deep connection to the land and the community, it was all rooted in this really profound spiritual philosophy, one that saw the world not as a straight line, but as a circle. The sacred circle of life was really the central metaphor for their whole worldview. Think about it. The seasons repeat, the animal migrations always return, and life itself is seen as this continuous cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. It's this beautiful way of capturing the idea that everything is interconnected and that life doesn't really have a hard beginning or end.
And this belief in a cyclical world wasn't just some abstract idea. It translated into a deep reverence for a creator, the Great Spirit, and for the spirits they saw in all of nature. The animals they hunted, the plants they gathered, they weren't just resources. They were respected parts of this sacred circle that sustained absolutely everyone.
But now, our story takes a dramatic turn. A new group of people arrives, and their worldview couldn't be more different. It was less like a circle and a whole lot more like a straight line, a quest with a clear start and a very specific finish line. Explorers from France and Britain, they weren't following the seasons. They were following a singular goal. They were hunting for the legendary Northwest Passage, this hoped-for waterway that they thought would be a shortcut to the incredibly rich trading markets of Asia. And this, right here, this gets to the absolute heart of the matter. You have two fundamentally different ways of seeing the land. For the First Nations, it was all about living with the land in a sustainable cycle. For the explorers, it was about moving through the land to achieve a goal and ultimately to claim it as their own. And this search wasn't just a quick trip. It was a centuries-long obsession. From the 1600s, when they started pushing out in all directions, all the way to the early 1900s, when they finally charted the high Arctic, Europeans were just relentlessly mapping and exploring this vast, vast continent. So, what happens when a cyclical world, one based on consensus and living in harmony with nature, meets a linear world driven by conquest and commerce? Well, you get the beginning of a new and often very conflicted nation. You know, the initial interactions were built on a misunderstanding that was just epic in scale. The first explorers who landed here didn't think they'd found a new world at all. They were completely convinced they had just found a new route to Asia. That single initial mistake, wow, it set the stage for everything that followed. And that linear quest for a passage, it permanently altered the land and the lives of its original inhabitants. That drive to explore led to mapping.
Mapping them led to trade. Trade led to new settlements, and those settlements eventually led to colonization, which changed the continent forever.
But that isn't the end of the story, not by a long shot. The legacy of these two worlds continues to shape Canada today, and the influence of that first cyclical world, it remains incredibly powerful.
Because despite centuries of change, the core values of the First Nations are still so strong. Their deep ecological wisdom, the power of their storytelling traditions, and just the sheer resilience of their cultural practices. These are not historical artifacts. They are a vital, living part of modern Canada's identity.
And that really brings us to our final thought. Understanding this history of two different worldviews meeting and clashing and merging, it isn't just about looking back. It forces us to ask a really critical question for today. How does our understanding of this complex past help us all build a more inclusive and sustainable future?